That's really interesting that the constitutional sheriff stuff is a big issue still. But for the last few years, these sheriffs have been acting as sort of laws unto themselves, especially when it comes to illegal immigrants across the country. And it's interesting that it all ties back to the Oath Keepers. And of course, the Rand and Ron Paul situation, as we just described, is an interesting one. So Mr. Rhodes got his own subpoena letter today. That's not really a surprise because so many of the people around Roger Stone on January the 6th that we've been able to track, so many of the people guarding him on January the 5th and January the 6th were in fact Oath Keepers. And we'll go through those names in just a second. But let's show you what Mr. Rhodes is accused of here in these subpoenas, or at least what they say he has information about. There are two letters, actually. One goes directly out to the Oath Keepers in general, and that's this one here. This is just addressed to the Oath Keepers, and it says the Select Committee investigation has obtained credible evidence of the involvement of the Oath Keepers in the events within the scope of the Select Committee's inquiry. The Oath Keepers is an entity incorporated in Nevada, and records indicate that Stuart Rhodes serves as the president. An indictment returned by federal grand jury in Washington, D.C. describes a conspiracy among at least 18 Oath Keepers in which members of the Oath Keepers plan to move together in coordination and with regular communication to storm the United States Capitol on January the 6th, 2021, including by traveling to Washington, D.C. with paramilitary gear and supplies, including firearms, tactical vests with plates, helmets, and radio equipment on October 6th, 2021. Another Oath Keeper was charged separately from this conspiracy. But this is really critical. What we're talking about here is that column of people that I think we may have identified on Narrative. I think we did. Joe, I think your reporting that was able to help us solidify that. This was the column of people that not only left the Donald Trump rally together and was very much a military formation, but also was then later inside the Capitol, spotted here. You can see some of them in this little court release document photo. There's all the circles basically are Oath Keepers. So these guys are dressed for battle. And inside the Capitol, they are dressed with, and had been planning. And again, those words, coordination, again, those words, communication, those are the things that they're looking at here. They're looking at the connective tissue that makes this a conspiracy.
That was
Can
the
I say
stat.
something?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Sandi.
Yeah, the stat, right. I just posted an article for the Washington Post about the communications between the Oath Keepers. They had their texts and stuff a few months ago. When I did my timeline, I took all the reporting that was out there, and there was one thing happened at 1:50 between the Oath Keepers. There was a flurry of texts and conversations. There was a 6.5 minute phone call with this person, number 10, and people at the time thought that was Roger Stone. So that might be something to look at, that article.
That's who we identified on the show. We know who person 10 is.
Is
it Stone?
That's Michael Simmons.
Okay.
Oh, it's not
right.
Stone. Okay.
Yeah, no, it's not.
And that's a very interesting story. The Michael Simmons is a really interesting story. Well, someone should go back and look at those tapes. It was a good show. So it's not Roger Stone, but Stuart Rhodes is number one.
But at 1:50, there was this flurry of communication. There was the golf cart thing incident. So I stole the golf cart and they, whatever. But at 2:11 was the first breach of the Capitol. To me, it looked like they were getting ready to, because the Capitol breach took 19 minutes. All four sides in an impenetrable building, 2:11 to 2:30.
Well, that's what happens when you've planned a military operation.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I think these numbers are still somewhat accurate, although they may have changed, but these have come from your timeline, I think, Sandi.
Exactly.
And you see there, it says here 2:30, but maybe it wasn't then at the...
2:11 was he broke that window. And all of those windows that were broken, they were unreinforced windows. How did that happen? Did you know that?
I didn't. We read about it recently. I think the Washington Post did a story about it recently, that the windows were opened somehow, or easy to open.
Yeah, they weren't reinforced. There was they found the windows that weren't reinforced.
Unbelievable information that we've been finding out from so many great sources, and including you two. So the indictment continues here. I won't go through the second part of the Oath Keeper subpoena because it's quite long. So we'll just jump here to Stuart Rhodes. And in this particular subpoena, this is the stuff that's directly attributable to him. It says the Select Committee investigation and public reports have revealed credible evidence. Yada, yada. We've heard that before. The Oath Keepers is an entity, very similar wording actually than the one I just read you. So I'll just go to the second part here. On election day, you declared that an honest election could only result in a win for Donald Trump, called for Oath Keepers to operate as undercover poll watchers, and encouraged members to stock up on ammo and prepare for a full-on war in the streets. On November 10th, 2020, days after the presidential election, you encouraged Oath Keepers to gather for the November 14th, 20 million MAGA march in Washington, D.C., stating, men will be standing by awaiting the president's orders to call us up as the militia, which would override D.C.'s ridiculous anti-gun laws. So Oath Keepers will have time will have some of the most special warfare veterans standing by armed just outside DC. I mean, that's pretty spectacular that we're saying that.
Yeah.
That same post sought to encourage attendance by recalling when Serbians overthrew their own government under a header titled, "What We the People Must Do." You quoted a patriot from Serbia. Millions gathered in our capital. There were no barriers strong enough to stop them. Police and military aligned with the people after a few hours of fistfights. We stormed the parliament and burned down fake state television. We won.
Fake news.
Yeah. Wow. So that was their plan.
You know, I did a thread called, it starts off and it says, Proud Boys times Oath Keepers multiplied by 3% equals the formula for insurrection. Because they are all together in this. And the thing about Stuart Rhodes, he was named in the indictment. So there is a conspiracy indictment already against a number of Oath Keepers, like you said. So far, we've identified about 10 people from the stack, or however many people are in the stack. So we have their names. We have some people who have pled guilty from those. But in the first sort of indictments, or in some of the first legal documents that we see, Stuart Rhodes was named and then redacted. So you could see Stuart Rhodes' name, and then you can go later into a superseding indictment and then see the name person one, where Stuart Rhodes used to be. So when I started to see what was happening in those conspiracy indictments, person one speaking to person 10, just as you said, Sandi, about the amount of communications that were going back, and then looking at your film and then terms of the time, and then watching, some of the live feeds from some of the news outlets. When you put the timeline against those conversations, it really does start to tell a picture, which is why it was so important for us to try and understand who person 10 is.
Yeah.
The other thing
How'd you figure that out? How'd you figure that out?
It was a long process. Okay. We looked at a number of videos of Oath Keepers doing patrols in Kentucky. So there was some other further unrest that was happening in Louisville. The Oath Keepers went down to guard a gas station, and we ended up finding the person that is
actually, that all ties to Carl Rittenhouse. I mean, that was sort of the same kind of action that we're doing around.
It's the same action.
Yeah, so there is connective tissue with all of this news that's been going on the last few days.
They were in Charlottesville, too.
Yeah, they were. They were all those places.
They were in Charlotte. And the militia who helped me, the 3%ers, were also, that helped me when I I fell there. They were also at the Bundy Ranch. They were Bundy guys. So they're all connected.
One of the other things that you mentioned from the subpoena was, guns and the gun laws within D.C. Don't forget, there was a QRF, right? So that was Stuart Rhodes' Oath Keepers Quick Reaction Force.
Right.
And there was a person who was there in the indictments that was named to be part of that Quick Reaction Force, where they were storing guns in a hotel, and I think it was Ballston, Arlington. Person 3 is an important person for us to identify, because that was the person who was listed in the indictments as the person who would be the QRF force. Stuart Rhodes has later gone on to sort of distance whoever that person is, because they said, it's this sort of, this old guy who was, broken down and he couldn't, really do anything. He had all the guns, and everybody who was coming to DC was storing their guns with them, to the point where you can even see in the indictment where people are texting back and forth, hey, I need to come get my shit after January 7th.
That quick reaction force is really important. I mean, it's important for everyone to realize that they were staging for war. They were planning what to do after they were able to seize the Capitol, after they were able to take some of the congressmen and senators hostage, maybe after they were able to get Pence or Pelosi, or whatever it is they were trying to do. They were planning to then have a quick reaction force ready to go, to respond to whatever the military might have done or anybody else might have done to try and quell the insurrection as it had taken place up to then. So this was a very planned out stage thing. They had the 4-stage maneuver to get into the Capitol within 20 minutes, as you point out, Sandi. And then the actual plan for what will happen inside, for what would happen after that, when the military or other people would have moved in.
Yeah. And after the shooting is when things really start to take off. There's more text messages and more phone calls that occur after the shooting of Ashley Babbitt.
Ashley Babbitt, which of course changed the dynamics of the whole day.
It changed the dynamics of everything.
That really was what...
244.
Yeah, changed everything that day.
So after that, you start to see the Oath Keepers gather outside the Capitol. I think at some point there's a text that says, hey, kind of rally on me sort of thing from person one, which is Stuart Rhodes. But what's interesting is you see in the indictment, I think they're in the 5th superseding indictment right now, there's about 18 or so, like person 18 or person 20 even, that they're up to. But only a few have been named. If you look at where Stuart Rhodes is, you can see everybody who was in the stack. So they're all rallied on him after the fact. And then there are others that are unidentified right now. I suspect that those others that are in that photo or in those pictures will be the people who will be named in further superseding indictments, which I'm hoping come soon.
Really interesting. We're going to talk a little bit more about the Oath Keepers. By the way, everyone's got this poll up on their screen. I hope you have. If you don't have it, it means you're not watching on the narrative.org/TV feed. Currently free for everybody. It will end up being a feature just for patrons. But while it's free for everybody, go and check it out because you can do all this incredible stuff. You can chat with us. We'll take messages and put them on the air as we head towards the end of the show here as well. But you can also poll people. And this is the question we're asking you tonight. Will Donald Trump be held accountable for January the 6th? So far, 35% of people say yes, and he'll serve time. 40% say yes, but he won't serve time. And 25% no, he'll win. He'll never be held to account. I tend to agree with the way things are flowing. I find it very hard to see him serving time, but I certainly would love to see him being held to account for all the information that we've been able to dig up, but also the information the commission must have. So head over to narrative.org/TV to get your vote in there. And also tell us in the comments about what you think about today's subpoenas in particular and what it means, Commission's final attempt here to get people to provide them with documents. The Oath Keepers are, just before we leave them, very important because they were also the security for Roger Stone that whole weekend. And we did a show with Noel Castler. Joe, you and I did this, which is quite detailed, looking into all these Oath Keepers and what they were doing around Roger. All these guys in these...
My friend's picture.
Is it your friend's picture? Well, it's a great picture because it reveals, thank you, Mark, for letting us use this. It reveals these caps. You know, each of these caps has the Oath Keep logo on them. Yeah. And it also, you know, even though they might seem hard to identify, the internet was a very wise thing and was able to identify all these characters at different times surrounding Roger Stone. And perhaps most notably, on the morning of January the 6th, Roger Stone was now famous Willard Hotel, a name you probably only heard on Narrative before it now became quite popular and quite famous. But we did expose the Willard to you first. There's tape of Roger Stone outside the Willard Hotel, and we're going to play a little bit of this now. You know this tape quite well, Joe, but feel free to jump in as well, Sandy, sure. What he did that morning. And around him, you can see all the Oath Keepers.
This lady's picture.
Thank you so much.
So you see the guys with the, I guess it's like a scarf around their neck.
What should I ask Mr. Roger Stone?
God bless you.
Get in a golf cart.
So that's Robert Menudo.
Robert Menudo is another Oath Keeper.
He was person 5 of the communist.
Appreciate you. Thank you very much. So hopefully we have this today, right?
We shall see.
We shall see. We're hoping so.
This is my Jewish brother. Excellent. Dr. Roger Stone. How are you? Excellent. You know I'm a Zionist.
A Zionist?
I think it's really interesting that he says that, actually.
I wish somebody gave me the tip for this. I'm so jealous.
You look good too. You look. God bless you. God bless you.
Better in person, right?
Oh, absolutely. I see you too. You look healthy.
It's just also brazen.
God bless you. God bless you.
Do you know what Nick Fuentes told me last week?
What did he tell you?
This is incredible. Two things have happened in New York that are terrifying. The Groypers, Nick Fuentes, did a rally in Staten Island outside, you know, because the anti-vax movement, right? You know this, Joe. It's all of the white supremacists have morphed into the anti-vax movement, the anti-mandate, you know. And Nick Fuentes was in Staten Island Hospital protesting, and then he showed up at Gracie Mansion with the Groypers chanting, Christ is King and America first, right? So I interviewed Fuentes, and I said, you know, you blocked me the day before you were suspended from Twitter. And so he has no platform. He says 75 million of us voted for Trump, and we're not going anywhere. And that was so terrifying.
True. So, you know, it's fascinating to me they haven't budged, but we will do our best to nudge them along to the truth because they really are following these kind of crazy ideas beyond rational thought, you'd think. It's interesting just on the Oath Keepers, just to wrap up the Oath Keepers and to wrap up their connections to Ron and Rand Paul. The interesting thing about Ron and Rand Paul is their fondness, shall I say, of Putin and Russia in general. Ron Paul was a regular in Russia, often visited Moscow, reminded people that the MSM wants us to cast Russia as an enemy, and it's wrong, said Ron Paul on Russia Today way back when. His son, Rand Paul, also very fond of traveling to the Kremlin. in one point traveling to deliver a letter to Vladimir Putin from Donald Trump, because that's what one does when you're a sitting senator. You know, it certainly raises questions about who the Oath Keepers really are, where's the money coming from, and what agenda are they really following?
Yeah. The libertarian ideology is all over there. It just is that we are seeing the blooming of the libertarian ideology into fascism.
Really, we are. It's pretty scary that they've
real-time fascism.
Yeah, they've convinced people that it's the way to go. So let's do the big news today, which was the RPL, and then we'll probably wrap up for today and continue if we can tomorrow because we're going to run out of time. But the First Amendment Praetorians are not something that's sort of on everyone's lips in America right now. People have not heard of the First Amendment Praetorians. Narrative viewers have heard of the First Amendment Praetorians because we were able to identify them as a real force within the insurrectionist movement because they took members of the Oath Keepers were part of their world. They seemed to be surrounding some of the influential leaders. And they were also present at the Willard in particular because the tape we just showed you outside the Willard, it showed Roger Stone. Later in that tape, you saw Rudy Giuliani exiting from the Willard. And there were many, many other very powerful people in the right-wing world, all at the Willard Hotel, right across the road from the White House, easy access for anyone who wanted to get across from the White House to come and join in. You know, it's interesting that the First Amendment Praetorian were there.
If you recall, that there was a photo of Rudy Giuliani and John Eastman from the Eastman Memo, Christina Bobb from OAN, and Philip Lulsdorf.
Philip von Lulsdorf, yeah.
He was the First Amendment Praetorian.
Indeed.
One of their business directors.
Absolutely. It's a really fascinating organization, and we'll go into them in just a second after we look at today's subpoenas. You know, drawing our line in the sand was what he described. Robert Patrick Lewis described what was going on January the 6th. He claims to represent military, law enforcement, and intelligence community vets. He has been running security at various events leading up to January the 6th, especially for all these dignitaries that we just described. And it is true that this guy, Philip von Lulsdorf, without the von, he's just known as Philip Lulsdorf, is one of his lieutenants. And here's that photograph you were mentioning inside the so-called war room where Giuliani was holding court on January the 6th, and maybe January the 5th as well. In there, you can see on the right there, the big white guy in the white sweatshirt. That is the First Amendment Praetorians' Director of Business Affairs, Philip von Lulsdorf. And there you can see how they were able to identify him using the various face technologies.
This is Freedom Plaza here across the street.
Fascinating, isn't it? That these guys who were, and I'm going to read you the subpoena that mentioned right now, just imagine how close they were to Rudy Giuliani and Roger Stone in the command center there, in the war room. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's certainly beginning to tell me that there's an indication that the First Amendment Praetorians might be the link between the leadership of the insurrection, the Roger Stone, Michael Flynn, and Alex Jones of the world, and also the people who actually committed the crimes and stormed the Capitol. So briefly, let's look at RPL. This is a subpoena. What do you guys think about these connections? They seem pretty volatile and important.
Absolutely. I think a couple of things that are from a connections perspective. Mm-hmm. When you say people are out there chanting Christ is King, I get that, and that's prayer, and I understand that, but there is way more to just those three words. Mm-hmm. Mike Flynn is using those three words, Christ is King.
One religion. Yeah.
One religion. That's what they're after. And there's,
that is so true, because we're going to play some tape as well that shows exactly that. Yeah.
So the fact that Mike Flynn was being guarded by the First Amendment Praetorian, again, we're talking about going back to the days of Rome, right? These Praetorian guards guarding the elite. So here you have Mike Flynn being guarded by the First Amendment Praetorians. You'll remember a person named Shadow Flynn. He's always around, guarding that person.
Yeah, it's the throwbacks are not, these are not coincidences that they're calling them these names. It's really fascinating, and they've been around. This is what the subpoena says about these guys. So the investigation and public accounts have revealed credible evidence of your involvement in the First Amendment Praetorian in the events within the scope of Select Committee's inquiry. The First Amendment Praetorian provided security to the Million MAGA March on November 14, 2020, including providing protection to Ali Alexander. You described your coordination with Mr. Alexander as tight at the hip. You later claimed that you provided security for Lieutenant General Michael Flynn at the Jericho March in Washington, D.C. on December 12, 2020, and have claimed to coordinate closely and regularly with Lieutenant General Flynn. You also claimed to coordinate closely with Sidney Powell. That's interesting that name comes up because tape will just play in a minute from now. You'll see him mention Sidney Powell and why she's so important to this. On January the 4th, 2021, the First Amendment Praetorian Twitter account suggested that violence was imminent. There may be some young National Guard captains facing some very tough choices in the next 48 hours. Pray with every fiber of your being that their choices are wise, just wise and fearless. And you were listed as a speaker on the permit for the Rally to Revival on Freedom Plaza, scheduled for January the 5th, 2021. Permit also stated that 25 members of the First Amendment Praetorian would serve as demonstration marshals on January the 6th, 2021. And on that day at 2:18 p.m., you tweeted, "Today is the true battle begins." At 4:13 p.m., the First Amendment Praetorian Twitter account tweeted, "The cost of truth is pain. The greater the truth, the greater the potential for pain." Boy, is it significant that they were the marshals for the march. These guys who were planning the insurrection.
What time?
Sorry,
was the second one, the 4 something? What was it? What time was that?
4:13
Well, that was when they were urging them to, we the people, to keep fighting.
Yeah.
And that's when they read his tweet again from earlier in the day, and he said Mike Pence didn't have the courage. He changed the tense. Up till that point, let's hope that Mike Pence has the courage, right? And then at 4, right around that time, he says Mike Pence didn't have the courage.
Interesting.
And keep fighting. You have to keep fighting. They wanted them to go into that building.
That was the plan. Who were they taking instructions from?
Exactly.
That's the thing which I, keep asking. By the way, Matt Fosa, who's the great composer of the show's music, says online here, the Praetorians assassinated emperors who didn't back the military. It's a really important point about the Praetorians and what their role was. So thank you, Matt, for throwing that into the chat here. We are talking about a very significant connection. When you talk about these people were the marshals, they were the security for the event that preceded the insurrection. In other words, they were connected on a piece of paper, actual proof, actual documentation, to the organizers of the event, to the creamers and all these other guys of the world. So you got real evidence there, real indisputable evidence that they were planning, on the one hand, an insurrection, planning to be violent, planning to do all these things. And on the other hand, they were also being hired as security, or so-called security, for people like Roger Stone, but also for the event itself.
There's a National Park Service permit that names the first Praetorian as being a part of a security. I'll see if I can find that document. I'll tweet it out after the show.
Yeah,
another thing, as I was saying earlier about how the Oath Keepers sort of, they're stepping stones to things, as they do it. First Praetorians do the same thing. This security that they were doing, right? They started out as like this security gig. They're also a surveillance team. And they were in Portland trying to gather information on Antifa protesters and then sending them to their friends that were still in law enforcement.
Absolutely.
So this is a surveillance organization as well.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because you also identified earlier on a clip from RPL where he talks about being the intelligence operation, basically the front-end intelligence operation for Sidney Powell, who, as we know, is the architect of the big lie. Here's that clip, which just comes from a YouTube, if I'm not mistaken, of RPL's. Here he is describing how he's helping Sidney Powell.
Helping them, the Sidney Powell legal team, that she doesn't have the money of the United States government behind her. This is a private enterprise. And so we've been helping their team in multiple respects, whether it be like what we're doing now, what we're talking about with physically protecting the whistleblowers and making sure that they're perfectly okay and will be available to testify when it's needed. We also have had our intelligence team working in a couple of different aspects, assisting her team. So our intel team has been processing a lot of OSINT, doing a lot of open source intelligence, a lot of digging, a lot of collating of all these different things that people have been sharing on social media regarding these, different pieces of this election fraud puzzle, whether it be digging into the companies that we know are behind it, Dominion, Smartmatic, Cital, and all of their ownership and all their connections to Venezuela and Iran and China and all these other places.
Oh my God.
Or the people that got physical videos at these different events or at some of the polling locations, and we're uploading it. We've been helping them kind of collate it and bring it to the right place.
That's pretty significant.
Okay. Somebody's talking. Somebody's flipping on these guys. I mean, I never heard of this guy.
Well, he's been around. The fascinating thing is he's doing this on YouTube. Sorry, Joe. Go ahead.
And something else that's just really important that we have to understand, too, is he's also a Green Beret, and he's trained in irregular warfare.
And wrote a book. He wrote several books.
He wrote a book.
Two books. Yeah. He wrote two. He's writing a trilogy. It's called The Pact. And in it, the main sort of themes are China, Russia, and Hezbollah all attacking the United States simultaneously. When in actuality, it really kind of turns out to be China, Russia, and his bullshit. Because he and Flynn, And Sidney Powell, there's just so many connective, like you said, Zev, so much connective tissue that this is definitely a thread worth pulling.
Yeah, I think this is one of the most significant things that they were trying to do today by releasing these new subpoena letters today. They are now forcing the media, which has sort of been really lax on this. I must say, I mean, they've not been doing the job that thankfully you guys have been helping us do here. But there's a really important connection here between this organization, the First Amendment Praetorians, and what they were doing for Sidney Powell and Michael Flynn. You remember that big meeting that they had where they were discussing this whole insurrection at the White House? It seems to me that the RPL and perhaps other members of the First Amendment Praetorian were chauffeuring Sidney Powell to that meeting, which is the meeting where they discussed the insurrection. So not only are they, acting as driving a security for her, they're also their intelligence operation. In other words, they're providing briefs for her. They're explaining to her what the lies might be from the Dominion voting company that they've investigated, which you just spoke about there. You could see that they're much more important than just security and drivers. They drove her there. They briefed her before probably and afterwards. What was that briefing like? And who gave them the assignment to brief her? Where are they getting this information
Who's paying
from?
them? Who's paying them?
Where's this information coming from? Were they being fed information from?
What about Eric Prince? Do you think Eric Prince is in there somewhere?
Eric Prince is in everything, I'm sure.
Everything, right?
I'm still waiting for that man to end up in jail maybe one of these days. But he must be in here because this is the kind of team that he hangs out with. I mean, these sort of former Marines and former, these are the kind of people he hangs out with. I'm sure we're going to find out that he is there. I've got so much more to do and I want to do it, but I think we're going to have to resume tomorrow because we are just going to run out of time if we continue to try jam this in. So if you guys are okay coming back tomorrow, we can pick up Alex Jones and Stone.
Oh my God. Joe, you're great. I mean, well, both of you together. I'm like, my head is exploding.
I was going to say both of you together, actually.
Putting all of those pieces together. I mean, I'm on the front line, but my friend Michael Nigro shot the stack, the great shot of the stack that everybody, he's a wonderful photojournalist. So, our jobs are so important. Just being there and pointing our cameras, and then leave it up to the rest of the people to figure out who they are.
You were one of the first people who pointed out to me, as we looked at that timeline together on the show, Sandy, that we were able to figure out that it was just 19 minutes. It's impossible to penetrate the Capitol in 19 minutes unless you've got some sort of plan. And if it's some sort of haphazard, everyone's going to stumble around. You're not going to get inside the entire Capitol on 4 sides in 19 minutes. There's not a chance. So obviously,
and my friends were at. Oh, by the way, Michael Nigro just did a little heart. He's listening to the show.
Okay. Great.
But the fact that this Pretoria guy is, going this babbling all this data off. I mean, this is planned for. It couldn't have been just since November, since they lost the election. It had to have been planned further than that, right?
They planned it further, and I think they planned it really badly, and they probably planned it with a lot of informants in their ranks, and without thinking about it, probably had this entire plan, shared widely, as we knew about it, many other people knew about it, and this is in fact what may bring them all down. Yeah. It certainly should bring them all down. Well, kudos
to the January 6th committee, because they really know what they're doing. Like Joe said, you know that name?
It's great. It's great. It really is great, because we've been sitting here in the dark a little bit, doing sort of our own parallel investigation and thinking, is the DOJ even following these people, or there's been quite a quiet on the First Amendment Praetorians. It certainly seems that the Jan 6 Commission is doing an incredible job of following all the right things. And tomorrow, I really want to build a case around the money, because the money flow is fantastic, and it's very easy to see how millions of dollars came directly from Donald Trump, or through his campaign at least, to the organizers of this event. That it's not, you don't have to look very hard to see how money flew here. And then China is all over this thing, and we'll break into, we'll talk about that. The irony of it all is, of course, they think that
Guo, and that guy Guo, Bannon's guy with the yacht,
the Moonies and all of that. That's all still coming.
Moonies. Oh my God.
It's an incredibly interesting investigation. P. San Fran Girl says we need to boost Dempsey 2's threads and research. They're extraordinarily important. I couldn't agree more. So everyone who has not yet followed him, follow him, boost him. Does amazingly interesting stuff. And I think I spotted you when you were at very few followers, but you've improved a little bit thanks to the narrative.
Great. You're really
and they're very entertaining threads. Very
secret weapon.
Someone's asking who owns the Willard. I think it's owned currently by the Intercontinental Hotel, but it's an interesting piece of property because it's right adjacent to the White House, which would put it in a security cordon, which would be would certainly make the Secret Service be aware of it very well, and they'd know the layout pretty well of how that place worked. So there's more research to be done on that. Let me see what else these people are asking here before we say goodnight. Maybe they could flee, says Matt Fausa again. Says the John Birch Society is back. They even have a Twitter account. Oh, I didn't realize that.
My mother was a member of the John Birch Society.
She was?
In Orange County. Yeah, card carrying.
And now look at you. Look at you now. She'd be so proud of you. Let me see what else we got here.
Oh, my God.
Well, I think that's it. I thank everyone for commenting tonight on the chat. I've got it fixed so we can work it more effectively, and we will continue to do so on tomorrow's show.
I had a fantastic time.
We had a great time too. Thank you
so much.
We're going to be back tomorrow. We'll try to do it at 7 o'clock. Hopefully the internet will be friends with me again. And we'll go through the rest of this. We'll go through Alex Jones, Stone, all the money, and everything else. It should be an interesting show. Thank you for being patient tonight. By the way, if you're not a member of patreon.com/narrative community, please do that as soon as you can, because it's really important that we keep funding this kind of programming. It's gotten prohibitively expensive to keep doing this. Without your support, we only have 1% of this audience watching right now is currently a patron. And we like to keep the programming free for everybody because it's so important. But in order for that to happen, we need some of you to pony up and subscribe or become patrons at patreon.com/narrative. You know, if you have time and if you have the money or the inclination, I heartily ask that you do that. And that's the show for tonight. Thank you, Joe Dempsey at Dempsey2. Thank you, Sandi Bachom at Sandi Bachom. I'm Zev Shalev at Zev Shalev. And this is the show for tonight. We'll be back tomorrow night at 7. Have a good night, everybody. Narrative is made possible by viewers like you. Join today and support truly independent journalism at patreon.com/narrative. That's patreon.com/narrative.